Story: Poor man loses job. For helping injured millionaire next day, helicopters land at his door. The alarm on Leo's cracked phone screen didn't so much chime as it did buzz with a weak, pathetic rattle, as if it too were exhausted. 4:30 a.m. Outside, the world was a canvas of deep indigo and black, a time that belonged only to bakers, street sweepers, and the worried. Leo was one of the worried. He swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet hitting the cold, worn linoleum of his bedroom floor. The entire apartment wasn't much bigger than a luxury car showroom, but it possessed none of the shine. It was, however, meticulously clean. Every object, from the threadbare armchair in the corner to the single, chipped mug by the sink, had its place. It was the kind of tidiness that spoke not of leisure, but of a desperate need to control the few things in life that could actually be controlled. He didn't turn on the main light, navigating the small space by memory. His first stop was the tiny kitchen, where he filled a kettle with water and set it on the stove. While it hissed to life, he moved to the small refrigerator. He pulled out a carton of eggs and a loaf of bread. He was careful, precise, cracking 2 eggs into a bowl and pulling out 2 slices of bread. Every motion was practiced, a quiet ritual performed in the pre-dawn gloom. The food wasn't for him. His own breakfast, which he would eat later while standing, was the 2 remaining slices of bread in the bag, maybe with a smear of margarine if it hadn't run out. This meal, the one he prepared with care, was for his mother. He carried the tray into the only other room in the apartment, which served as a living room and, for the past 2 years, his mother's bedroom. Maria was asleep in a hospital bed that took up most of the space. It had been a rental at first, an astronomical expense he couldn't afford. After 3 months of missed payments, the company had called to reclaim it. Leo had begged, pleaded, and finally emptied the entirety of his meager savings meant for a new scooter engine to buy the used, creaking thing outright. It was his now. Another wait. A soft, wheezing sound came from her with every breath. It was the sound that haunted his sleep and dictated his every waking moment. Her chronic respiratory illness had a long, complicated name, but to Leo, it was just the sickness. It was a thief that had stolen her strength, her laughter, and what little money they had. He set the tray on the small bedside table next to a formidable lineup of orange prescription bottles. He could list their names, dosages, and refill dates from memory. He was more familiar with pharmaceutical schedules than any 30-year-old man should be. "Mama," he whispered, gently touching her shoulder. Maria's eyes fluttered open. They were kind eyes, the same ones that had looked at him with boundless pride when he was a boy. Now, they were clouded with pain and a deep, weary guilt that tore at Leo's heart. "Leo, my boy," she rasped, her voice a fragile thing. She pushed herself up, a grimace of pain flashing across her face. "You are up so early." "It's time for work soon," he said, forcing a cheerful smile. It felt heavy on his face. "But first, breakfast. And your morning meds." He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back. He cut her toast into small, manageable squares and placed the fork in her hand. She looked down at the food, then at him. "You work so hard, Leo," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "For me, I am a heavy stone around your neck, my son." "Never," Leo said instantly, his voice firm. "You are not a stone, Mama. You're my anchor." He wasn't sure if it made sense, but it was what his heart said. "Now eat. You need your strength." She managed a weak smile and began to eat, slowly. Leo watched her, his own stomach, a tight knot of anxiety. The eviction notice was still tucked under the fruit bowl in the kitchen. The latest letter from the specialist, recommending a new treatment not covered by their basic insurance, was hidden in his drawer. These were secrets he kept to shield her, but they were a poison he had to swallow every single day. His eyes drifted to a small, faded drawing tacked to the wall beside her bed. It was a charcoal sketch of a bird in flight, its wings stretched with impossible freedom. He had drawn it when he was 17, the year he had won a full scholarship to the State Art College. Maria had been so proud, her joy lighting up their world. 2 weeks later, she had her first major attack. The scholarship money had been deferred, then forgotten. His life had taken a different path, a path that led to the relentless clang and grind of the Ashford Creek Metalworks factory. He never picked up a charcoal pencil again. He didn't regret his choice, but sometimes, in the quiet moments of the morning, he mourned the boy who had dreamed of creating beauty instead of just surviving. "Is everything all right at the factory?" Maria asked, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. Leo snapped back to the present. Everything's fine, Mama. Same old, same old. It was a lie. Things were not fine. The factory was a pressure cooker, and the foreman, Mr. Henderson, was the man turning up the heat. He just needed to get through this month. That's what he told himself every day. If he could just get through this month, pick up a few overtime shifts, maybe the medical bills wouldn't drown him. He helped his mother with her medication, kissed her on the forehead, and promised to call her during his lunch break. Be safe on that scooter, Leo, she said, her hand clutching his for a moment. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Always, he promised. Stepping outside, the cold morning air hit him like a slap. Ashford Creek was a town painted in shades of gray. A perpetual haze from the factory smokestacks hung in the air, giving the sunrise a dirty, muted quality. The houses were all similar, small and hunched, as if braced against a constant wind. It was a town built for work, not for living, and you could see the toll it took on the faces of the people who trudged towards the bus stop, their shoulders already slumped in defeat. Leo swung his leg over his scooter. It sputtered to life with a reluctant cough, the engine sounding almost as weary as he felt. He checked his cheap watch. 4:55 a.m. His shift started at 6 a.m. sharp. He had just enough time. Usually, as he pulled onto the main road leading out of town, his mind drifted back to yesterday. The memory came unbidden, sharp and unpleasant. He'd been at his station when he heard Mr. Henderson's booming voice echo across the factory floor. The target of his wrath had been Timmy, a kid barely out of his teens, on his third week at the job. Timmy had misaligned a sheet of metal, a small mistake that would have taken 5 minutes to fix. But Henderson, a man whose bald head seemed to gleam under the harsh factory lights with pure malice, saw it as a personal affront to his authority and his bottom line. "Are you an idiot or do you just enjoy wasting my money?" Henderson had bellowed, his voice cutting through the din of machinery. The entire section had fallen silent, everyone keeping their heads down, pretending not to watch the humiliation. I'm sorry, sir. I thought," Timmy had stammered, his face bright red. "You thought?" Henderson had sneered, stepping closer. "You're not paid to think. You're paid to do exactly what you're told. This mistake cost us 32 seconds of production time. 32 seconds. Do you have any idea what that adds up to over a year? Tears don't fix profit margins, boy. Now fix it, and the next time you cost me a single second, you'll be out on the street." Leo had felt a hot surge of anger then, a protective instinct for the terrified kid. But he had said nothing. No one ever did. To speak up against Henderson was to paint a target on your own back, and with his mother's health on the line, Leo couldn't afford to be a target. He had just kept his head down, the sound of the stamping machine a heavy drumbeat of compliance. Thump, thump, thump. The memory left a sour taste in his mouth. That was the man he worked for. A man who measured human dignity in seconds lost. A man who held the livelihoods of an entire town in his meaty, unforgiving hands. Being late wasn't an option. It was a cardinal sin. Leo shook the thought away, trying to focus on the winding, misty road ahead. He twisted the throttle, pushing the small engine, and drove on into the cold, unforgiving morning. The old scooter's engine whined in protest as Leo pushed it harder, the small motor straining against the cold morning air. Every minute that ticked by felt like a physical weight pressing down on him. The winding country road was slick, with a damp morning mist that clung to the trees and swirled across the asphalt, limiting his visibility. It was beautiful in a lonely, haunting way, but Leo had no mind for beauty right now. His thoughts were a frantic, desperate calculation. If I can make it to the main highway before 5:30, I can skip the slow town route. If I don't get stuck behind the daily dairy truck, I can make up 5 minutes. If Henderson is in the back office when I clock in, he might not even notice. The ifs piled up, a fragile wall against the rising tide of panic in his chest. This wasn't just about avoiding a verbal lashing from his foreman. It was about the overtime shift he'd been promised for Saturday. It was an extra 8 hours at time and a half. To Henderson, it was a payroll number. To Leo, it was the copay for his mother's next specialist visit. It was the difference between refilling her most expensive prescription or trying to stretch the current supply for another week. The thought made his stomach clench. He couldn't afford to lose that shift. He couldn't afford any mistakes. He leaned into a sharp curve, the scooter's tires humming on the wet pavement, and then he saw it. It wasn't a sudden, explosive sight. It was a gradual realization of wrongness, a break in the monotonous line of trees, a shape that was too dark, too angular, too still. He slowed, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs for an entirely new reason. There, wrapped around the thick trunk of an old oak tree, was a car. It was a luxury vehicle, the kind you saw in magazines, not on this forgotten stretch of road. It was sleek and black, or at least it had been. The front end was a concertina of crumpled metal, steam hissing softly from the mangled hood. One headlight was smashed, but the other cast a single, erratic beam of light into the shifting fog, like a dying eye. The scene was silent, save for the ticking of the cooling engine and the drip of some fluid onto the dark asphalt. Leo skidded to a stop, his own scooter wobbling precariously. He stood there for a long moment, the world narrowing to this single, shocking tableau. His mind screamed at him, "Go. Don't get involved. You are already late. You cannot afford this." He could almost hear Mr. Henderson's voice, thick with sarcasm, echoing in his head. "And I suppose you were the only hero on that road?" He pictured the man's scowling face, the glint of contempt in his eyes. He thought of the time clock on the factory wall, its red numbers unforgiving, 5:21 a.m. His window of opportunity was closing with every second he stood here. He thought of his mother. He thought of her soft, pained breathing in the dark. If he lost this job, how would he care for her? Who would help them? This single, stupid decision to stop could unravel the fragile life he had so carefully stitched together. The temptation to just get back on his scooter and drive away was immense, a physical pull. No one would know. He could just forget he ever saw this. He took a shaky breath, his knuckles white on the handlebars. He had to go. He had to. Then he heard it. It was a faint sound, almost lost beneath the hissing of the engine. A low groan. It was a human sound. And in that instant, the frantic calculations, the fear of Henderson, the desperate need to get to work, it all vanished. It was replaced by a singular, overriding imperative. There was a person in that car, a person who was hurt. "No," he whispered to himself, shaking his head as if to clear it. "No, you don't leave." He kicked down the scooter stand and ran. "Hello," he shouted, his voice sounding thin in the open air. "Is anyone in there? Can you hear me?" He reached the driver's side. The door was wedged shut, the frame bent from the force of the impact. He grabbed the handle and pulled, grunting with effort. It didn't budge. He braced his feet, his worn-out work boots slipping on the damp ground, and pulled again with all his strength. The metal shrieked in protest before finally giving way with a loud bang, slumped against the steering wheel. Amidst the chaos of a deployed airbag was a man. He was older, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, with silver hair at his temples. Even torn and stained, his suit was clearly expensive, made of a fine gray wool that was utterly out of place in Leo's world. A dark gash on his forehead was bleeding sluggishly, and his eyes were dazed and unfocused. The man groaned again, trying to lift his head. What happened?" he mumbled, his voice thick and disoriented. "You've been in an accident, sir," Leo said, his voice surprisingly steady. He could feel his own adrenaline coursing through him, but he knew panic wouldn't help. "Try not to move. I'm going to call for help." He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy with haste. The cracked screen lit up, and he quickly dialed for emergency services. "Yes, I need to report a car accident," he said, his eyes scanning the road for a mile marker. "It's on Old Creek Road, about 3 miles east of the highway turnoff. A single vehicle. One person injured. He's conscious, but confused." He relayed the information calmly and clearly, just as he'd seen on television shows. After he hung up, he turned his attention back to the man. "Help is on the way, sir. They'll be here soon." The man blinked slowly, trying to focus on Leo's face. My head," he said, reaching up a hand before Leo gently stopped him. "It's best not to touch it, sir. You have a cut. Just stay still." "What's your name?" The man's brow furrowed in concentration. "Sterling," he finally managed. "Arthur Sterling." "Okay, Mr. Sterling. My name is Leo. I'm going to stay right here with you until the ambulance arrives." Leo spoke to him in a low, reassuring voice, asking simple questions to keep him conscious. He talked about the weather, about the morning mist, about anything at all to fill the silence and keep the man's attention tethered to the present. He was acutely aware of the time, of the precious minutes bleeding away just as surely as the blood from the gash on the man's forehead. But he pushed the thought away. He had made his choice. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 15 minutes before the distant wail of a siren grew steadily louder, cutting through the morning quiet. Soon, the flashing red and white lights of an ambulance were illuminating the fog-shrouded scene. The paramedics were efficient and professional, taking over immediately. They assessed Mr. Sterling, carefully fitted him with a neck brace, and prepared to move him onto a backboard. As they were lifting him into the ambulance, Mr. Sterling's gaze found Leo, who was standing back, watching from the side of the road. For a moment, the dazed look in the man's eyes cleared, replaced by a flash of sharp, focused lucidity. He seemed to be taking in every detail of Leo's appearance, the worn-out factory uniform, the grease stains on his hands, the look of genuine concern on his face. "Thank you," Mr. Sterling said, his voice stronger than before. He held Leo's gaze. You helped me." "Oh, I'm just glad I was here," Leo replied, meaning it. "Just focus on getting better, sir." The paramedics closed the doors, and the ambulance sped away, its siren once again piercing the air as it disappeared down the road. Leo was left alone in the sudden silence, standing beside the wrecked, empty car. The rising sun was finally beginning to burn through the fog, casting long shadows across the road. Then, reality came crashing back. He looked at his watch. The screen read 6:27 a.m. A cold, heavy dread, far worse than any anxiety he'd felt before, settled in the pit of his stomach. He was almost 30 minutes late. There was no excuse Henderson would accept, no story that would save him. The Saturday overtime was gone. He might be lucky to still have a job at all. He ran to his scooter, his earlier hope now a bitter memory. He kicked the engine to life and sped off down the road, the image of the wrecked car in his mirror and the weight of his decision pressing down on him with every turn of the wheels. He had done the right thing. He knew it. But as he raced towards the factory, he had a terrible, sinking feeling that he was about to pay a very high price for it. The roar of the factory was a familiar monster, a chaotic symphony of hissing pneumatics, the rhythmic crash of stamping machines, and the high-pitched whine of industrial saws. To Leo, it had always been the sound of his life, a noisy, demanding, but steady beat. Today, as he skidded his scooter to a halt by the employee bike racks, it sounded like a judge's gavel. He ran. His legs felt heavy, his lungs burned, but he forced himself past the security gate, waving a breathless apology to the guard who just shook his head. He burst through the double doors onto the factory floor, the sudden wave of heat and noise washing over him. The air was thick with the metallic tang of cut steel and the faint, acrid smell of welding fumes. For a fleeting, insane moment, he thought he might make it. The floor was a sprawling labyrinth of machinery and conveyor belts. Mr. Henderson's glass-walled office was on the far side, overlooking the main production line. If Leo could just get to his station, punch his card late, yes, but there he might just become another face in the crowd, another cog in the machine. He ducked behind a towering coil of raw steel, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He could see his station, just 50 feet away. It was a foolish hope. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the industrial din like a shard of glass. It was cold, dripping with a theatrical sarcasm that was uniquely Mr. Henderson's. Leo froze, his back to the voice. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Just turn around. Face him." He slowly turned. Mr. Henderson stood there, not 10 feet away. He wasn't yelling, he was worse. He was smiling a thin, humorless smirk that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He was a portly man, but he held himself with an unearned air of authority, his stomach straining the buttons of his short-sleeved company polo. In his hand, he held a clipboard, which he tapped rhythmically against his thigh. The workers nearest them had already fallen silent. The subtle shift in the factory's rhythm was instantaneous, a ripple of fear spreading outwards. Everyone knew what a foreman standing on the floor with a clipboard meant. It meant someone's day was about to end. "Leo," Henderson said, his voice now taking on a tone of mock sympathy. "We were all so worried. We thought you'd abandoned us. It is..." He paused to theatrically check his watch. 7:03. You are 1 hour and 3 minutes late. Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry, Leo began, his voice coming out as a breathless rush. He took a step forward. I can explain. There was an accident on Old Creek Road. A bad one. A man was hurt. The car was a wreck. I had to stop. I had to help him. I called the ambulance. He trailed off as Henderson held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. An accident, Henderson repeated, savoring the word. He let out a short, sharp laugh that was devoid of any humor. A hero. We have a hero in our midst. He turned his head slightly, raising his voice so more people could hear. Did you all hear that? Leo here was delayed because he was busy saving the world. Never mind the fact that Line B has been running at 70% capacity for the last hour. Never mind the fact that your absence created a bottleneck that cost this company money I have to answer for. He took a step closer, invading Leo's personal space. His voice dropped to a low, menacing growl. This is a factory, Leo, not a stage for your moral dramas. Your job is to be here, at your station, at 6 o'clock, not playing paramedic on the side of the road. Oh, shame, hot and suffocating, washed over Leo. He could feel the eyes of his coworkers on him. He saw pity in some, but fear in most, the fear that Henderson's wrath might turn on them next. Sir, it was an emergency, Leo pleaded, his voice cracking. This was his last chance. He had to make him understand. The man was bleeding. He was disoriented. He could have been seriously injured, maybe worse. What was I supposed to do, just drive by? Yes. Henderson snapped, his face instantly hardening. The pretense of sarcasm was gone, replaced by pure, undiluted fury. That is exactly what you were supposed to do. Your responsibility is here. Your paycheck comes from here. Your priorities are supposed to be here. He jabbed a thick finger into Leo's chest to punctuate the word. But my mother, the words tumbled out before he could stop them. A raw, desperate plea. She's sick, Mr. Henderson. You know that. I need this job. I have medical bills. I need the overtime you promised me for Saturday. Please, I'll stay late all week to make up for it. Just don't do this. He hated the sound of his own voice, the pathetic, begging tone. But the image of his mother's face, the stack of unpaid bills, it stripped him of his pride. Henderson stared at him for a long moment, a look of utter contempt on his face. He shook his head slowly. You know, I've heard that one before. My mother is sick. My kid has a fever. It's always something. You people always have an excuse for not doing the one thing you are paid to do. It was a punch to the gut. The accusation was so unfair, so cruel, that it stole the air from Leo's lungs. That's not, Leo started, but Henderson cut him off. Pack your locker, the foreman said, his voice flat and final. He turned his back on Leo, a clear gesture of dismissal. You're fired. The words hung in the air. The noise of the factory seemed to rush back in, louder than before, but it felt distant, like he was hearing it from underwater. He just stood there, unable to move, unable to process it. Fired. The word echoed in the sudden, silent space in his mind. Henderson turned back one last time. And don't even think about asking for a reference. As far as I'm concerned, you were unreliable. Now get off my floor. No one said a word as Leo, his face a mask of numb disbelief, turned and began the long walk of shame towards the employee locker room at the back of the factory. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on his back. The walk felt like it was miles long. Each step was a fresh wave of humiliation. The locker room was empty and smelled of stale sweat and metal dust. He stared at his locker, number 73. His hands were trembling as he fumbled with the combination lock. Inside was a spare shirt, a well-read paperback novel, and a photo of his mother, smiling on a day before the sickness had taken hold. He carefully took the photo out and stared at it. He had failed her. He slowly gathered his few belongings, stuffing them into the small backpack he carried to work every day. It was over, just like that. A decade of his life, erased in a matter of minutes. He's a bastard, you know. The voice made Leo jump. An older man named Sal was standing in the doorway, his face etched with the deep lines of a man who had worked 40 years in this factory. He was wiping his hands on a greasy rag, his expression grim. Sal had always been kind to him, sharing his lunch when Leo forgot his, offering quiet advice on how to handle the more difficult machinery. He had no right, Sal continued, stepping into the room. I saw the whole thing. Most of us did. Leo just shook his head, unable to speak. He didn't trust his own voice. Sal came closer and did something unexpected. He reached into his own worn leather wallet and pulled out two $20 bills and a 10. He folded them and tried to press them into Leo's hand. "Here, kid. It's not much." "But," Leo pulled his hand back instinctively. "No, Sal, I can't. That's your money." "Just take it," Sal insisted, his voice firm but kind. "Your mother. She needs her medicines, right? Don't let pride get in the way. Not now." He pushed the money into the front pocket of Leo's jeans. "You did the right thing today, Leo. Don't you ever let a man like Henderson make you think otherwise. Some things are more important than a time clock." Tears pricked at the corners of Leo's eyes, hot and shameful. He was overwhelmed by the man's unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Sal," he managed to choke out. Sal just clapped him once on the shoulder. A solid, reassuring gesture. "Go on now. Get out of this place. It's no good for a decent soul anyway." With a final nod, Sal left. Leo stood alone again, the $50 feeling like both a lifeline and a lead weight in his pocket. He took one last look around the locker room, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm him, and slung his backpack over his shoulder. He walked out of the factory, not looking at anyone. He didn't use the main entrance but a side door, unable to face the security guard again. The heavy metal gate clanged shut behind him, the sound of the lock clicking into place like a final, metallic verdict. He was on the outside now, unemployed, adrift, and terrified of what he was going to tell his mother. Leo didn't go straight home. He couldn't. The thought of facing his mother, of seeing the fragile hope in her eyes crumble into fear because of what he had done, was a weight too heavy to bear. The words, "I was fired," felt like shards of glass in his throat. He drove his scooter aimlessly, the engine sputtering a pathetic echo of the turmoil in his own chest. The streets of Ashford Creek, once just a familiar backdrop, now seemed alien and hostile. He saw other people going about their day, a mail carrier on his route, mothers pushing strollers, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops, and he felt a profound and sudden sense of disconnect, as if he were watching it all through a thick pane of glass. They belonged. He no longer did. He was a ghost haunting the edges of his own life. Eventually, he found himself at the town's small, neglected park. He parked the scooter near a rusted swing set and walked towards a solitary wooden bench overlooking a murky pond. He sank onto it, his body feeling boneless, his backpack landing with a soft thud beside him. He stared out at the water, but he didn't see it. He saw Mr. Henderson's sneering face. He heard the final, dismissive clang of the factory gate. He felt the phantom weight of Sal's $50 in his pocket, an act of charity that felt both kind and deeply humiliating. A wave of nausea washed over him. He had done the right thing. Sal had said so. His own conscience, a small, persistent voice beneath the roar of panic, told him so. But what good was a clear conscience when you had an eviction notice on your kitchen counter? What good was moral victory when it meant you couldn't afford your mother's next breath? The full, crushing weight of his situation settled upon him not like a blanket, but like a slab of concrete. It wasn't just the loss of income. It was the loss of structure, of purpose, of the very identity that had defined him for a decade. He was Leo, the factory worker, the dependable son, the man who handled things. Now what was he? He pulled the worn photo of his mother from his backpack and looked at her smiling face. The picture had been taken at a town picnic years ago, before the first diagnosis, before the word chronic had entered their lives and taken up permanent residence. She looked vibrant, happy, her head thrown back in laughter at something he'd said. He had been her rock. Now he felt like a pebble, about to be washed away by a tide he couldn't fight. A profound sense of failure, cold and absolute, seeped into his bones. He hadn't just let himself down, he had let her down. He sat there for hours, a statue of despair, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. People came and went from the park, but no one bothered him. He was just another piece of the town's quiet desperation, invisible. He didn't know what to do. His mind, usually so quick to solve problems, how to fix the leaking faucet, how to stretch a paycheck an extra 2 days, how to recalibrate a faulty press at the factory, was a complete and utter blank. There was no solution here. There was only the dead end. Finally, as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, he knew he couldn't put it off any longer. She would be worried. His silence would be more alarming than any bad news. With a deep, shuddering sigh, he pushed himself to his feet, the simple act requiring a monumental effort. The ride home was the shortest and longest of his life. He parked the scooter and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, each step an ascent to his own personal gallows. He paused outside the door, composing his face, trying to assemble a mask of calm that he did not feel. He took a deep breath and turned the key. Maria was in her bed, reading a book, a blanket tucked neatly around her. She looked up as he entered, her face immediately breaking into a warm smile. "Leo, you're home early," she said, her voice filled with pleasant surprise. Then her smile faltered as she saw his face. A mother's intuition is a powerful, fearsome thing. It cuts through all pretense. "What is it? What's wrong? Are you ill?" "No, Mama, I'm not sick," he said, his voice quiet. He walked over and sat on the edge of her bed, avoiding her searching gaze. "Then what is it?" she persisted, her voice taking on a new edge of concern. She set her book aside. "Your eyes, they look like a storm, my son. Talk to me." He couldn't lie, not to her. He took her hand, it felt so frail in his, and looked up, finally meeting her eyes. "There was a problem at work today," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I was late. I stopped to help someone on the road. There was an accident. And Mr. Henderson, he didn't need to finish. He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated fear that mirrored his own. "He fired you," she breathed, the words hanging in the small room like a death sentence. Leo just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He had expected her to be angry, or to cry, or to panic. She did none of those things. Her reaction was far worse. A look of deep, profound guilt settled over her features, a sorrow so heavy it seemed to age her 10 years in a single second. "This is my fault," she whispered, her hand trembling in his. "All of this. The bills, the pressure on you. If it weren't for me and this useless body, you would be free. You wouldn't be working in that terrible place for that awful man. You would still be an artist. You wouldn't have lost your job. Because you had to take care of me." No," Leo said, his own pain momentarily forgotten in the face of hers. "Mama, no. Don't you ever say that. This is not your fault. This was my choice. Helping that man was my choice. This is on me and on Henderson, not you, never you." But his words felt hollow. He could see that she didn't believe him. She saw herself as the source of all his hardship, the anchor he had called her that morning. But she imagined it as an anchor pulling him down into the depths. He had tried to protect her from the world, and in the end, all he had done was confirm her deepest fear, that she was a burden. The silence that fell between them was thick with unspoken fears and shared despair. That night, sleep offered no escape. Leo lay in his bed, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling that looked like a roadmap to nowhere. Every small sound in the building, the creak of floorboards, the hum of a distant refrigerator was amplified, a reminder of the world moving on without him. The eviction notice, which he'd pulled from under the fruit bowl, lay on his bedside table. The stark, official font seemed to mock him in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. Notice to vacate. Failure to comply will result in legal action. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of his complete and utter failure. He had one job, to keep a roof over their heads, to keep his mother safe. And now, because he had stopped to help a stranger, a man whose name he barely knew, he was about to lose it all. He replayed the morning's events over and over, a torturous loop in his mind. The wrecked car, the man's dazed eyes, Henderson's sneer, Sal's $50. Each image was a fresh stab of pain. Had he been a fool? Should he have just driven by? Saved himself and left that stranger to his fate? The questions circled his mind like a vulture. But even now, in the depths of his despair, lying in the dark with his world collapsing around him, the answer was still the same. He couldn't have. It simply wasn't in him. He closed his eyes, a single hot tear, tracing a path down his temple. He was a good man who had been punished for his goodness. It was a bitter, cruel irony. And as he finally drifted into a restless, dreamless sleep, he had never felt more alone, or more certain that his life was over. While Leo wrestled with his demons in a cramped, moonlit apartment, another man lay in a room that was the antithesis of Leo's world. It was a private suite at the state's most exclusive hospital, a place where the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of money. The walls were a soothing cream color, the lighting was soft and indirect, and the view from the panoramic window showcased the city skyline, glittering like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Arthur Sterling was awake. The throbbing in his head had subsided to a dull, persistent ache, managed by medication delivered through a silent IV drip. His mind, however, was sharp, the fog of the accident having finally dissipated. He was a man accustomed to being in absolute control, the architect of a vast business empire built on strategic thinking, ruthless negotiation, and an uncanny ability to read people. The last 24 hours had been a jarring aberration. He had been helpless, disoriented, and vulnerable, a state he loathed. He stared at the ceiling, not with the despair of Leo, but with the focused intensity of a chess master replaying a lost match. The fragmented memories of the crash were coming back in sharp, disjointed flashes. The sickening screech of tires on wet road, the explosive jolt of impact, the suffocating scent of the airbag. But one memory was clear, a calm island in the sea of chaos. It was a face, a young man's face, etched with genuine concern, framed by the jagged opening of his car door. "My name is Leo." The name had stuck with him. In the moments before the paramedics had taken over, in that brief window of lucidity, Arthur had seen something in the man's eyes. It wasn't pity or the morbid curiosity of a bystander. It was simple, unvarnished decency. It was a quality Arthur rarely encountered in his world of corporate boardrooms and calculated alliances. He pressed a button on the remote beside his bed. Within 30 seconds, the door to his suite opened noiselessly and a woman entered. Evelyn Albright was in her early 40s, with a severe, stylish haircut and an aura of competence that was almost palpable. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored navy blue pantsuit, she was Arthur Sterling's chief assistant, his gatekeeper, his fixer. She had been with him for 15 years, and she could often anticipate his needs before he voiced them. "Good morning, Arthur," she said, her voice calm and professional. She held a tablet in her hands. "The doctor was pleased with your scans. He said you were remarkably lucky, a mild concussion and a few bruises." "Luck had very little to do with it, Evelyn." Arthur corrected her, his voice a low rumble. "There was a man. He pulled me from the car. He called the ambulance. His name is Leo." Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. "I've already begun inquiries, sir. The emergency services log confirms a call was made from a private citizen at the scene. We are working on identifying him from the phone number." "Oh, accelerate it," Arthur commanded. "I don't want it worked on, I want it done. Find him. I want to know everything about him. Where he works, where he lives, what he had for breakfast. Everything. A man like that, you don't just send him a fruit basket." In Arthur's world, information was the ultimate currency. Power wasn't just about having money, it was about knowing how and when to use it, and that required a complete understanding of any given situation. His rescuer was not just a loose end to be tied up with a polite thank you note. He was a variable, an unknown quantity, and Arthur Sterling did not tolerate unknown quantities in his life. "Of course, Arthur," Evelyn said, already tapping away on her tablet. The resources at her disposal were formidable. Within moments, she was interfacing with databases that could cross-reference the phone number with public records, employment histories, and credit reports. It was a level of investigation that would have been terrifyingly invasive to an ordinary person, but in their world, it was simply due diligence. An hour later, Evelyn returned. She stood before Arthur's bed, her expression uncharacteristically grim. "I have the information you requested," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "His name is Leo Petrov, 30 years old. Lives at 412 Elm Street, apartment 3B. He is the sole caregiver for his mother, Maria Petrova, who suffers from a chronic pulmonary condition." Arthur listened, absorbing the details. It was a picture of quiet struggle, of a life lived on the margins. It confirmed the impression he'd had of the man. "And where does he work?" Arthur asked. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, the only sign of her discomfort. "He was employed at a place called Ashford Creek Metalworks. He worked the morning shift as a press operator." "But was?" Arthur picked up on the past tense immediately. "Why was?" "He was terminated this morning," Evelyn stated, her eyes fixed on his. "The reason cited was tardiness. He was 1 hour and 3 minutes late for his 6 a.m. shift. Arthur stared at her, the dots connecting in his powerful mind with sickening speed. The time of the accident, the time of the emergency call, the time Leo would have arrived at his job. It all lined up perfectly. A cold, unfamiliar anger began to build in his chest. It was a clean, pure rage, quite different from the calculated indignation he sometimes deployed in business negotiations. This was personal. He was fired, Arthur said, the words coming out low and dangerous. He was fired from his job because he was late, because he was busy saving my life. That appears to be the case, yes, Evelyn confirmed. Arthur was silent for a long moment. The skyline outside his window seemed to mock him with its serene beauty. He had built an empire, conquered markets, and amassed a fortune that could alter the fates of nations. Yet, a good man's life had just been shattered as a direct consequence of his own misfortune, and the injustice of it was galling. Evelyn, he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion, a sign she knew meant he was at his most serious. Tell me about Ashford Creek Metalworks. B. Evelyn swiped a finger across her tablet. It's a mid-sized fabrication plant. Decent output, but a history of high employee turnover and several minor labor disputes. It's a subsidiary of a larger holding company, Sterling North Industries. She paused. Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. He had acquired Sterling North in a massive, hostile takeover 6 months ago. It was a sprawling conglomerate with hundreds of assets. He had barely glanced at the smaller, less profitable holdings in the portfolio. A metalworks factory in a rundown town was a line item, a rounding error on a balance sheet. He owned it. He was the man at the very top of the food chain that employed the foreman who had fired Leo. The irony was so bitter, it tasted like ash. Who is the plant foreman? Arthur asked, his voice lethally quiet. A man by the name of Henderson, William Henderson. He's been there for 12 years. And before. Get me Henderson's employee file. Get me the factory's recent performance reports. And get me the contact information for our head of human resources at Sterling North. Right away, Evelyn said, already moving. One more thing, Arthur called after her. She turned. I want a full financial workup on Leo Petrov. Bank accounts, debts, medical bills for his mother, rent status. I want to understand the exact nature of the damage this man Henderson has caused. Oh. As Evelyn left, Arthur Sterling leaned his head back against the plush pillows. The gears of his immense power, so long dedicated to acquisition and profit, were beginning to turn in a new direction. He was no longer just a victim of a car crash. He was an instrument of consequence. Mr. Henderson, the petty tyrant of Ashford Creek Metalworks, had made a grave miscalculation. He thought he had fired a powerless, insignificant factory worker. He had no idea that he had just sealed his own fate by wronging a man who had, by a complete accident of fate, earned the gratitude and attention of one of the most powerful men in the country. Arthur closed his eyes. The game had changed, and he was about to make his first move. The next morning, the sun rose over Ashford Creek with the same tired indifference as always. It painted the gray houses in pale, watery shades of yellow and promised another day of quiet, unremarkable struggle. For the residents of Elm Street, it was a morning like any other. Mrs. Gable from 2 Ampere was watering her geraniums. The Johnson kids from next door were engaged in a loud, chalk-drawing turf war on the sidewalk. Mr. Chen was loading up his van for his restaurant supply route. It was a perfectly ordinary slice of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Leo was not a part of it. He sat at his small kitchen table, a mug of black coffee untouched in front of him. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, trapped in a silent scream of panic. The eviction notice on the table seemed to have its own gravitational pull, drawing his eyes and his thoughts. He had spent the pre-dawn hours scouring online job boards on his cracked phone, his hope dwindling with each listing that required a degree he didn't have or experience in a field he knew nothing about. The world felt like it was sealed shut. His mother was quiet in the other room. He'd given her the morning medication, but the usual gentle conversation between them was gone, replaced by a thick, painful silence. Her guilt and his despair had built a wall between them. The air in the apartment was heavy with things unsaid. Then came the sound. At first, it was just a faint, rhythmic thumping in the distance, a low-frequency vibration that Leo felt more than heard. He thought it might be a passing freight train on the tracks a mile away. But it didn't fade. It grew steadily, consistently, gaining a distinct texture. It wasn't the rumble of a train. It was a powerful, percussive WHUMP, WHUMP, WHUMP that seemed to be coming from the sky itself. Outside, Mrs. Gable stopped watering her flowers, her head cocked. The Johnson kids paused their drawing, their sticks of chalk held aloft, their squabble forgotten. Mr. Chen, halfway into his van, straightened up and squinted at the sky. The sound grew louder, no longer a distant beat but a dominant, roaring presence that rattled the window panes in Leo's apartment. It was the unmistakable, earth-shaking sound of helicopter blades slicing through the air. Helicopters weren't an entirely alien sight. The state police or a medical transport would occasionally pass high overhead. But this was different. This was low, and it was getting lower. People began to emerge from their small houses, drawn by the incredible noise. They stepped onto their porches and front lawns, shielding their eyes as they looked up. Their faces were a mixture of confusion, alarm, and awe. "What in the world?" Mrs. Gable murmured, her watering can forgotten at her feet. The source of the commotion broke through the low-hanging clouds. It wasn't one helicopter, it was two. They were sleek and black, with no markings or logos, like something out of a spy movie. They were not passing over, they were descending. The roar became deafening, whipping up leaves and loose debris from the street into a swirling vortex. Dogs started barking frantically. Car alarms, triggered by the vibrations, began to shriek up and down the block. The sight was utterly surreal. These were machines of immense wealth and power, symbols of a world that had nothing to do with Elm Street. Yet they weren't heading for a distant airfield or a corporate headquarters downtown. Their target, impossibly, was here. With breathtaking precision, the lead helicopter descended not into a nearby field, but directly onto the street itself, its landing skids touching down on the faded double yellow lines right in front of Leo's modest, three-story apartment building. The second helicopter hovered protectively above and to the side, its downdraft flattening Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias. The street fell into a stunned, disbelieving silence, punctuated only by the whine of the decelerating turbines and the blaring of a single stubborn car alarm. Residents stared, their mouths agape. Kids pointed, their eyes wide. Smartphones were already being raised, their small lenses trying to capture the sheer absurdity of the moment. A black corporate helicopter had just landed on their street like it was a private driveway. Inside his apartment, Leo was on his feet, peering through the grimy window. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. He saw the helicopter, the swirling dust, the faces of his neighbors looking up in unison. For a wild moment, he thought it must be a police raid. Was someone on their street a fugitive? A drug lord? It was the only explanation that made any sense. The side door of the landed helicopter slid open with a smooth, expensive hiss. But the figures who emerged were not police officers in tactical gear. They were men in sharp, impeccably tailored black suits and discreet earpieces. They moved with a calm, purposeful efficiency that was more intimidating than any show of force. One of them scanned the area, his gaze sweeping over the gawking neighbors with detached professionalism. Another spoke quietly into his wrist. Leading them was a woman. She stepped out of the helicopter with an air of absolute command, her high heels clicking firmly on the asphalt. It was Evelyn Albright. She held a tablet, and she glanced down at it, then up at the facade of Leo's building, confirming the address. Her expression was poised and unreadable. Without a moment's hesitation, she and two of the suited men began walking directly towards the entrance of his building. Leo's blood ran cold. They were coming for him. The thought was illogical, insane, but he knew it with a terrifying certainty. There was no one else in this building they could possibly be here for. A fresh wave of panic, sharper and more potent than anything he had felt before, seized him. What had he done? Was this about the accident? Had the man, Mr. Sterling, died? Was he being blamed for something? His mind raced, inventing a dozen terrible scenarios, each one more frightening than the last. Maybe he'd moved the man when he shouldn't have. Maybe he was a witness to something he wasn't supposed to see. He backed away from the window, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He heard the heavy front door of the building open downstairs, followed by the sound of firm, confident footsteps on the worn staircase. They were coming up. First floor, second floor. He was trapped. His small apartment suddenly felt like a cage. He looked at the door, his only escape route, as if expecting it to burst open. Then came the knock. It wasn't a tentative tap or a friendly rap. It was a firm, authoritative sound that echoed in the silent apartment. 3 distinct, resonant knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Leo froze, every muscle in his body tensing. He couldn't breathe. It felt as if the entire world had gone silent, holding its breath, waiting for him to answer that knock. He thought of the eviction notice. He thought of his mother in the next room, who must have heard the commotion. He thought of the wrecked car on the misty road. His life had been unraveling for 2 days, and he had the distinct feeling that whatever was on the other side of that door was either the final thread being snipped or something else entirely. Something he couldn't possibly imagine. He stared at the cheap wooden door, his hand hovering over the doorknob, caught between the terror of the unknown and the impossibility of escape. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the small, silent apartment. The 3 knocks echoed in Leo's mind, each one a hammer blow against his fragile composure. His first instinct was to hide, to pretend he wasn't home, a childish impulse born of pure terror. But the roar of the helicopter just outside his window was a stark reminder that hiding was not an option. These were not people who would be deterred by an unanswered door. From the other room, he heard his mother's faint, questioning voice. "Leo? Who is that?" Her voice broke the spell. He couldn't let them frighten her. Taking a shaky breath that did little to calm his racing heart, he walked to the door. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. He turned the lock, a sound that seemed deafeningly loud, and pulled the door inward just enough to peer through the crack. The woman from the helicopter stood directly in front of him. Up close, she was even more formidable. Her gaze was direct and intelligent, and she offered a smile that was polite, professional, and completely unnerving. Flanking her in the narrow hallway were the 2 men in dark suits, their presence filling the space, their expressions impassive and watchful. They were like stone sentinels guarding a queen. "Leo Petrov?" the woman asked. Her voice was exactly as he would have imagined, crisp, clear, and confident. Leo could only manage a nod, his throat too tight for words. "My name is Evelyn Albright," she said, her smile softening slightly as if she sensed his terror. "I'm an associate of Mr. Arthur Sterling. May we come in for a moment? We have something important to discuss with you. I promise we mean you no harm." And the name Arthur Sterling hit Leo like a physical blow. The man from the crash. He hadn't died. This wasn't a police matter. It was something else, something even more confusing. He was too stunned to refuse, too intimidated to do anything but comply. He numbly stepped backward, pulling the door open wider to allow them to enter. They stepped inside, and the small, humble apartment seemed to shrink in their presence. The contrast was jarring, almost comical. These 3 figures, radiating wealth and power in their expensive suits and polished shoes, looked utterly alien against the backdrop of his worn-out furniture and faded floral wallpaper. The men remained standing by the door, their hands clasped respectfully in front of them, their eyes scanning the room with a subtle but thorough surveillance. Miss Albright, however, walked to the center of the room, her gaze taking in the space not with judgment, but with a quick, appraising efficiency. She saw the eviction notice on the table. Her eyes flickered towards it for only a second, but Leo was certain she had registered its significance. "Please don't be alarmed," she said again, her tone gentle. "Mr. Sterling was very insistent on speaking with you personally. He wanted to thank you." She held up the tablet she was carrying. The screen was dark, but with a swipe of her finger, it came to life, connecting a live video call. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar, yet different. It was Mr. Sterling. He was propped up on pillows in what was clearly a hospital bed, but the room around him was luxurious. The dazed, injured man from the side of the road was gone. In his place was a man who, despite the bandage on his forehead, exuded an aura of immense authority and calm. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and focused directly on Leo. "Leo," Mr. Sterling's voice said, coming through the tablet speaker. It was a rich, powerful baritone, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. "I hope Miss Albright and her team haven't caused you too much of a fright. Landing on your street was perhaps a bit theatrical, but I find it's the most efficient way to travel." Leo just stared, speechless. He felt like he had fallen into someone else's dream. I'm glad you're okay, sir," Leo finally stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I am okay thanks to you, Mr. Sterling said, his expression serious. "The doctors were very clear. My concussion could have been far more severe if I had remained in that car any longer. Your quick thinking, your decision to stop and call for help, it made all the difference. I owe you a significant debt. You don't owe me anything, sir, Leo said quickly, shaking his head. I just did what anyone would have done. A soft chuckle came from the tablet. That's a noble sentiment, Leo, but it's where you're wrong. Not everyone would have stopped. I've lived long enough to know that decency like yours is not a common commodity, especially when it comes at a personal cost. A chill went down Leo's spine. He knows. I had my team look into you, Leo, Mr. Sterling continued, confirming his fear. I believe in knowing the character of a man I am indebted to. In doing so, I learned that your act of kindness resulted in the termination of your employment. The bluntness of the statement left Leo with nothing to say. He could only nod again, a fresh wave of shame washing over him. I also learned something else, Mr. Sterling said, his voice taking on a harder edge. I learned that the foreman who fired you, a Mr. Henderson, works for a company called Ashford Creek Metalworks. And Ashford Creek Metalworks, as it happens, is a minor asset in the portfolio of a larger corporation I acquired last year. Leo's mind reeled. He stared at the face on the screen, trying to comprehend the impossible chain of events being laid out before him. The man he had pulled from a wrecked car on a deserted road was, in some distant corporate way, his own boss's boss's boss. It didn't seem real. A man who fires an employee for demonstrating basic human compassion has no place in any organization I run, Mr. Sterling stated, his voice now like ice. Rest assured, Leo, Mr. Henderson's professional situation has already been permanently addressed. But I didn't arrange this meeting to talk about him. I arranged it to talk about you. Mr. Sterling paused, his gaze seeming to look right through the screen and into Leo's soul. You see, I was on that road for a reason. I was feeling disconnected, burnt out. I spend my days in boardrooms, surrounded by people who want something from me. I was driving to my old childhood home, trying to find a piece of something real, and then I crashed my car and I found it. In you. You didn't see a wealthy man or an opportunity. You just saw a person who needed help. That quality integrity is the rarest and most valuable asset a person can possess, and you have it in abundance. Leo felt completely overwhelmed. A whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him, confusion, relief, and a dizzying sense of vertigo. Which brings me to my proposal, Mr. Sterling said. At this, Miss Albright stepped forward. She placed a thick, leather-bound folder on Leo's small kitchen table. The sound it made was a soft, expensive thud. Mr. Sterling is establishing a new philanthropic entity, she explained, her voice professional but kind. The Sterling Foundation for Emergency Aid. Its mission will be to provide rapid response grants and support to individuals and families who face sudden, unexpected hardship, job loss due to a medical emergency, displacement by a natural disaster, situations where the system is too slow to help. Mr. Sterling wants you to run it. Leo stared at her, then at the folder, then back at the tablet. He was sure he had misheard. Run it? He whispered, his voice hoarse. But I'm a factory worker. I stack metal. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. I don't have a degree. I'm not qualified. You are more qualified than any Ivy League graduate I could hire. Mr. Sterling's voice cut in, firm and certain. I can hire people with degrees. I can hire accountants and lawyers. I cannot hire character. I cannot teach compassion. I need someone at the head of this foundation whose first instinct is to help, not to calculate. Someone who understands what it feels like to be one paycheck away from disaster. I need you, Leo. Leo sank into one of his rickety kitchen chairs, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He opened the folder. Inside were official-looking documents, filled with legal jargon he didn't understand. But he saw the title printed at the top of the first page. Employment Contract, Leo Petrov, Executive Director. The position, miss, Albright said gently, as if sensing he needed the details to be real, comes with an annual salary of $200,000. Leo's head snapped up. He thought he was going to be sick. The number was so astronomical, so divorced from his reality, it sounded like a joke. It also includes a company car, she continued, a full relocation package to the city, and comprehensive medical insurance for you and any dependent family members, effective immediately. Medical insurance. The words hit him harder than the salary figure. He thought of his mother. He thought of the constant worry, the fear of a single hospital stay bankrupting them. He thought of the new treatment the specialist had recommended, the one he knew they could never, ever afford. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the face on the tablet. He looked from Miss Albright's patient expression to the life-altering contract on his table. This couldn't be happening. Men like him didn't get rescued. They didn't get second chances that looked like this. Life just ground them down until there was nothing left. I don't know what to say, he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. Say yes, Leo, Mr. Sterling said. And for the first time, a warm smile spread across his face. Say you'll help me do some good in this world. While Leo's world was being fundamentally remade in his small apartment, another man's world was about to be completely dismantled. William Henderson sat in his glass-walled office, sipping a lukewarm coffee from a mug that read, World's Best Boss. He was feeling particularly pleased with himself. The production numbers for the morning were already back up to 98% efficiency. He had made an example of Leo Petrov, and the message had clearly been received. The workers on the floor were moving with a renewed, fear-driven urgency. That's how you manage people, he thought. Not with coddling, but with a firm, decisive hand. You cut out the weak links before they could compromise the entire chain. When his phone rang, he answered it with a self-important bark. Henderson, Mr. Henderson, said a crisp, female voice he didn't recognize. Please hold for Miss Evelyn Albright, Chief of Staff for the office of Mr. Arthur Sterling. Henderson sat up straighter. Arthur? Sterling? The name was legendary. The new owner, the titan of industry who had bought their parent company, Henderson had never imagined he would have direct contact with someone so high up. This had to be it. Corporate had noticed his ruthless efficiency. They had seen his numbers, his ability to keep the workforce in line, and the profits flowing. This was the promotion he'd been working towards for 12 long years. A corner office at headquarters. A real salary. Respect. A moment later, the same crisp voice spoke again. I have Miss Albright for you. Mr. Henderson, said a new voice, cool and professional. My name is Evelyn Albright. I'm calling you today regarding a personnel matter. Yes, Miss Albright. A pleasure to speak with you, Henderson said, his voice oozing a practiced deference. He leaned back in his chair, trying to sound casual, powerful. Whatever you need, I'm your man. Excellent, Miss Albright replied, her tone unwavering. Then this should be straightforward. As of 10 minutes ago, your employment with Ashford Creek Metalworks, and by extension Sterling North Industries, has been terminated, effective immediately. The silence that followed was so profound that Henderson could hear the frantic beating of his own heart. He thought he had misheard. I'm sorry? He stammered. The smug smile wiped clean from his face. There must be some mistake. My numbers are exemplary. I just had to let an unreliable worker go yesterday to maintain line efficiency. There is no mistake, Mr. Henderson, Miss Albright cut in, her voice like Arctic ice. We are well aware of your decision to terminate Mr. Leo Petrov. It is, in fact, the precise reason for this call. Firing an employee for rendering aid at the scene of a life-threatening accident constitutes gross misconduct and a flagrant violation of the ethical standards we expect from our management. Your actions were not just poor management, they were a disgrace to the company. Henderson felt the blood drain from his face. Petrov? This is about Petrov? But he was late. It was an unexcused absence. How would you even know about that? The panic in his voice was rising, shrill, and desperate. The man Mr. Petrov stopped to save was Mr. Arthur Sterling, Evelyn stated, delivering the line with the devastating finality of a guillotine blade. It did not compute. Henderson's mind simply refused to accept the information. The billionaire owner, in a car wreck, helped by Leo Petrov? The sheer, cosmic improbability of it was too much to grasp. It was a joke. It had to be. That's impossible, he whispered. I assure you it is very much possible, Miss Albright continued, her voice relentless. Security will be there in 5 minutes to escort you from the premises. You will be given 1 hour to clear out your personal belongings. A standard severance package will be couriered to your home address, which is more than you deserve. Do you have any questions? Henderson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion, rage, and a dawning, sickening horror. He had built his entire identity around this job, this small kingdom where he was the undisputed ruler. He had wielded his power like a club, enjoying the fear he inspired. Now, in a single 5-minute phone call, it had all been obliterated. He had been swatted aside like an insect by a power so vast he couldn't even comprehend it, all because of the insignificant, soft-hearted factory worker he had so gleefully fired yesterday. No, he finally mumbled, his bluster completely gone. He was no longer a king in his castle. He was just a fat, middle-aged man in a cheap polo shirt who had just lost everything. Very good. Goodbye, Mr. Henderson, Miss Albright said, and the line went dead. Henderson sat there, the silent receiver pressed to his ear, staring blankly through the glass wall at the factory floor that was no longer his. Back on Elm Street, the contrast could not have been more stark. While one man's life was imploding, another's was being reborn. After a long, stunned silence, Leo had finally found his voice. Yes, he had whispered, the single word feeling impossibly large in his mouth. Yes, I'll do it. On the tablet, Mr. Sterling had smiled. Excellent. Evelyn will handle all the arrangements. And she did. With a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking, Leo's life began to transform. The first and most important matter was his mother. The medical insurance is effective immediately, Evelyn explained, tapping on her tablet. I've taken the liberty of forwarding Maria's file to Dr. Alistair Finch at the Metropolitan Central Hospital. He is the leading pulmonologist in the state. They have a bed waiting for her. A private transport ambulance will be here in 2 hours to move her. Leo stared at her, overwhelmed. 2 hours. He had spent 2 years fighting with insurance companies, begging for appointments, trying to navigate a system designed to crush people like him. Now, with a few taps on a screen, this woman had arranged for the best care imaginable. He went into his mother's room. She had heard snippets of the conversation, and she looked at him with wide, questioning eyes. He sat on her bed, took her hand, and for the first time in a very long time, he was able to deliver purely good news. "Mama," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears of relief. "Everything is going to be okay. We're going to get you help. Real help." He explained everything, the impossible story of the man in the car, the job offer, the foundation. He told her about the specialist, the private hospital room, the new treatments that were suddenly within reach. Maria listened, her hand flying to her mouth. She didn't cry with sorrow or guilt, but with a joy so profound it was painful to watch. The years of worry and fear seemed to melt from her face, replaced by a wave of radiant, disbelieving hope. "Oh, Leo," she wept, pulling him into a hug. "My good, good boy. I always knew you had a good heart. I never imagined." For the first time since he was a child, Leo allowed himself to cry freely, his head resting on his mother's shoulder. They were tears, not of despair, but of a catharsis so deep it felt as if a physical weight was being lifted from his soul. The 2 hours that followed were a whirlwind of surreal activity. The black helicopter departed, leaving the neighborhood in a state of buzzing gossip. True to Evelyn's word, a sleek, private ambulance arrived, staffed by 2 kind and respectful paramedics who treated Maria not like a burden, but like a VIP. They gently transferred her to a comfortable gurney, ensuring she was warm and settled for the journey. Leo was about to follow her into the ambulance when Evelyn stopped him. "There is one more thing, Leo," she said, handing him the leather-bound folder. "The contract, for it to be official." He took the folder and the expensive-looking fountain pen she offered him. He found the signature line at the end of the long document. Leo Petrov. He paused for a second, looking at his own name. It looked strange, foreign, attached to such an important document. He thought of his worn-out work boots, the grease under his fingernails that never seemed to wash out completely. He thought of the roaring factory and the condescending smirk on Henderson's face. Then he thought of his mother's hopeful tears and the future that had suddenly, miraculously, opened up before them. With a steady hand, he signed his name. The ink flowed smoothly onto the page, a simple signature that was the closing of one life and the beginning of another. He gave the folder back to Evelyn. She nodded, a genuine, warm smile finally reaching her eyes. "Welcome to the Sterling Foundation, Mr. Petrov." He climbed into the ambulance and sat beside his mother, holding her hand as the vehicle pulled away from Elm Street, leaving the small apartment, the eviction notice, and his old life behind for good. He was no longer just Leo, the factory worker. He was someone else now. He wasn't sure who that person was yet, but for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. 3 days later, Leo stood in front of a gleaming skyscraper made of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. The Sterling Tower. It was the nerve center of Arthur Sterling's vast empire, and on the 48th floor, it housed the brand new offices of the Sterling Foundation for Emergency Aid. He smoothed down the front of his suit for the 10th time. It was a charcoal gray suit, expertly tailored, and it felt like a costume. The day after signing the contract, Evelyn Albright had arranged for a personal shopper to meet him. The man had been kind, but Leo had felt like an imposter the entire time, standing awkwardly as he was measured and fitted for clothes that cost more than his old scooter. The shoes on his feet, made of soft, polished leather, were a world away from the steel-toed work boots that had been a part of him for a decade. He felt disconnected from his own reflection. Taking a deep breath, he pushed through the revolving glass doors into a lobby so vast and opulent it resembled a modern art museum. The floors were polished marble. A massive, abstract sculpture dominated the center, and people in expensive attire moved with a silent, purposeful rush. He felt the familiar sensation of being out of place, a scuffed penny in a tray of gold coins. He approached the security desk, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm. Leo Petrov," he said to the guard. "I'm here to see Miss Albright, on the 48th floor." The guard, without looking up, slid a scanner towards him. "ID, please." Leo fumbled for the new corporate ID card Evelyn had given him. He placed it on the scanner. A green light flashed. The guard's demeanor instantly changed. He looked up, his expression shifting from bored indifference to polite respect. "Of course, Mr. Petrov," he said. "Miss Albright is expecting you. Go right ahead to the express elevators." The title Mr. Petrov still sounded jarring to his ears. He nodded his thanks and walked towards the elevators, feeling 100 pairs of eyes on him, even if there were none. The express elevator was silent and impossibly fast, his ears popping as it ascended. The doors opened directly into the Foundation's reception area. The space was stunning. It was modern and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city below. It wasn't ostentatious, but it radiated a quiet, confident wealth. Evelyn Albright was there to greet him, emerging from a hallway with a warm smile. "Leo, welcome to your first day. It's a lot to take in," he admitted, gesturing vaguely at the view. From up here, Ashford Creek was an invisible, forgotten speck on the horizon. "You'll get used to it," she said kindly. "Come, let me show you around and introduce you to your team." The team was small and dedicated. There was Ben, a young, sharp financial analyst who would manage the Foundation's endowment and grant distributions. There was Sarah, a compassionate woman with a background in social work who would handle case management and outreach. They both greeted Leo with genuine warmth, shaking his hand firmly. There was no condescension in their eyes, only a sort of respectful curiosity. Mr. Sterling had clearly briefed them not just on who Leo was, but why he was chosen. Finally, Evelyn led him to an office at the corner of the floor. It was spacious, with a large mahogany desk, comfortable-looking chairs, and a window that offered the best view in the building. On the desk was a brand-new laptop, a sleek phone, and a simple, elegant nameplate. It read, "Leo Petrov, Executive Director." Leo stared at it, then at Evelyn. "This is my office?" "It is," she confirmed. "Mr. Sterling believes the person in charge should have a clear perspective." No. He felt a fresh wave of imposter syndrome. He, Leo Petrov, who had eaten his lunch standing by a noisy machine for 10 years, was now the executive director with a corner office. It felt fundamentally wrong. "I don't know how to do this, Evelyn," he confessed, his voice low. "I don't know anything about endowments or case management or any of this." Evelyn's smile was patient. She gestured to one of the chairs, and they both sat down. "Leo, you aren't expected to know everything on day one. Ben and Sarah are the best at what they do. They will handle the technical aspects. Your job is not to be a financial analyst or a social worker. Your job is to be the heart of this foundation. It's to provide the moral compass." She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Sterling's instructions were very clear. Every major decision, every grant approval, must ultimately come through you. He wants to ensure that we never lose sight of the mission, that we never become just another faceless bureaucracy. He trusts your judgment. Your primary qualification for this role is your character. The rest, she said, gesturing around the office, can be learned. Her words were reassuring, but Leo still felt a deep-seated anxiety. It was one thing to be a good person. It was another thing entirely to be responsible for millions of dollars and the lives of people depending on it. For the first few weeks, I'll be here to walk you through everything, Evelyn continued. We'll go over the financials, the legal frameworks, the operational procedures. But today, I think the best way for you to understand what we do is to see it firsthand. She slid a thin folder across the polished desk. It was unmarked. This is our first official grant application. It came in yesterday. I want you to read it. Then I want you to tell me what you think we should do. Leo opened the folder. Inside was a one-page letter, printed from an email, and a few accompanying documents. A hospital bill, a termination letter, a rental agreement. His hands trembled slightly as he began to read the letter. To whom it may concern, my name is Mark Rendell. I am writing to you because I don't know where else to turn. I am a single father to a 7-year-old girl named Maya. 2 weeks ago, Maya fell from the monkey bars at her school playground and broke her leg in 2 places. It was a bad break, requiring surgery and pins. The hospital stay and the surgery have wiped out my savings. I work in construction, pouring concrete. It's hard work, but it pays the bills. Or it did. Because of Maya's surgery and her follow-up appointments, and because I had no one else to watch her, I had to take time off work. I used my sick days, then my vacation days. It wasn't enough. My foreman, a man named Mr. Klein, told me the company couldn't afford to have an unreliable worker. Yesterday, he let me go. Now I have no job, no savings, and a daughter who needs me. Our rent is due next week, and I have no way to pay it. The hospital is already sending letters about the outstanding bill. I feel like I'm drowning. I was a good worker. I never missed a day until Maya got hurt. But I was punished for being a father. A social worker at the hospital told me about your new foundation. She said you help people in emergencies. I don't know if this qualifies. I am not looking for a handout. I am looking for a lifeline. Just enough to keep our apartment and pay the medical bill so I can focus on finding a new job and taking care of my little girl. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Mark Rendell. Leo finished reading and looked up, his eyes stinging. The parallels to his own story were so stark, so precise, it was like looking into a mirror. The foreman's callousness, the impossible choice between work and family, the suffocating feeling of drowning in circumstances beyond your control. He knew every single one of those feelings intimately. He could feel this man's desperation as if it were his own. He looked at the attached termination letter. Failure to meet scheduling requirements. It was the same cold, corporate language that had been used to discard him. He looked at the overdue rent notice. It was almost identical to the one that had sat on his own kitchen table just days ago. This wasn't an abstract case file. It wasn't a set of numbers on a page. It was a life. A father and his little girl, pushed to the edge of a cliff for no reason other than bad luck and a lack of compassion. In that moment, all his feelings of being an imposter, all his anxiety and self-doubt vanished. They were replaced by a powerful, surging sense of purpose. He finally understood. He wasn't here to learn about spreadsheets and legal jargon. He was here for this. He was here for Mark Rendell. He was here because he was the only person in this gleaming tower who knew exactly what it felt like to be that man. He looked across the desk at Evelyn, his expression clear and certain. "What do we do?" he said, his voice steady and strong. "We help him. We pay his rent for the next 2 months to give him breathing room. We settle the entire hospital bill. And," he added, an idea sparking in his mind, "I want you to get our legal team to review his termination. If there's any case for wrongful dismissal, I want us to fund it." He slid the folder back to her. "This is why I'm here, isn't it?" Evelyn Albright looked at him, and her professional smile was replaced by one of genuine, deep respect. "Yes, Leo," she said softly. "This is exactly why you're here. 6 months passed. The city, once an intimidating landscape of glass and steel, had become Leo's home. The charcoal gray suit no longer felt like a costume, but simply what he wore to work. He moved through the gleaming halls of the Sterling Foundation, not with the swagger of a born executive, but with a quiet, steady confidence that had earned him the unwavering loyalty and respect of his small team. His corner office was no longer a sterile, intimidating space. One wall now held a large corkboard covered in photos and thank you notes. There was a picture of Mark Rendell and his daughter Maya, smiling in front of their new apartment. Mark had found a better job with a more humane company. There was a letter, written in a child's scrawl, from a family whose home the foundation had helped rebuild after a fire. There was a graduation photo of a young woman whose tuition they had covered after her parents were in a car accident. Each picture, each note, was a testament to the work they were doing, a tangible reminder of the lives they had touched. The foundation, under Leo's guidance, had found its rhythm. He had proven to have an uncanny instinct for the work. Because he had lived on the brink, he could spot desperation in a formal letter and recognize genuine need through a wall of frightened pride. He never saw the applicants as case files or statistics. He saw them as the person he used to be. His guiding principle was simple. How would I have wanted to be treated? It cut through bureaucracy and ensured their aid was not just financial, but also compassionate. This afternoon, he was not in his office. He was at the Bright Horizons Rehabilitation Center, a peaceful facility with sun-drenched gardens and quiet, airy rooms. He sat beside his mother, Maria, who was comfortably propped up in an armchair reading a novel. The constant wheezing struggle for breath that had haunted their lives was gone. With the best care, new medications, and physical therapy, her health had improved dramatically. The weary lines of pain and worry on her face had been smoothed away, replaced by a serene contentment. "That Mr. Sterling called again this morning," she said, placing a bookmark in her book. "He asked how my hydrangeas were doing." Leo smiled. Arthur Sterling, now fully recovered, had become a regular presence in their lives. He was more than a benefactor. He had become a genuine friend and mentor to Leo, and a sort of doting, surrogate nephew to Maria, calling to check on her and sending her rare flowers for her garden. "He worries about you," Leo said. "He's a good man," Maria replied, her eyes twinkling. "He was very lucky that it was you who found him on that road." "No, I think," Leo said, looking at his mother's healthy, smiling face, "I was the lucky one." Later that evening, Leo stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in his own apartment, a spacious but modestly decorated place downtown. He looked out at the city lights, a glittering tapestry that no longer felt alien or hostile. The phone rang, and he smiled when he saw the caller ID. "Arthur," he said warmly. "Leo, my boy," came Mr. Sterling's robust voice. "Just calling to see how our new project is coming along. Did you review the proposal for the Youth Vocational Training Program?" "I did," Leo said, his mind shifting easily into his work. "The numbers look solid. I think we can make a real difference there. I have a few notes I'll send over." They talked for another 10 minutes, a comfortable mix of business and friendship. After he hung up, Leo's gaze fell upon something on his living room wall. It was a painting. It was a small canvas, a charcoal and watercolor sketch of a single powerful bird in flight against a stormy sky, its wings outstretched with a sense of defiant freedom. He had painted it himself a month ago. One Saturday, he had walked past an art supply store and, on an impulse, had gone inside. The familiar scent of turpentine and oil paints had felt like coming home. He had bought a small set of supplies, and that afternoon, for the first time in over a decade, he had painted. And it had felt right. He was no longer just Leo, the former factory worker, or even Leo, the executive director. He was just Leo, a man who could run a multi-million-dollar foundation, who could ensure his mother had the best care in the world, and who could find joy in putting charcoal to canvas. He was finally whole. He thought back to that cold, misty morning 6 months ago, a moment that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. He remembered the despair, the humiliation, the absolute certainty that his life was over. He had believed then that he had been punished for doing the right thing, but he saw now that it wasn't a punishment. It was a catalyst. It was the violent, terrifying end of a life he was never meant to live, clearing the way for the one he was. They say that no good deed goes unpunished. And for a time, that certainly felt true for Leo. But sometimes, life's greatest rewards are found just on the other side of its greatest trials. A single choice, A simple act of human decency on a lonely road didn't just save a man's life. It set in motion a chain of events that rescued a life that was already quietly drowning. It proved that a good heart, in the end, is the most powerful asset of all. One act of kindness didn't just give a man a new job. It gave him back his future, his passion, and his purpose. Thank you for joining us for this story at Up Story. We believe that stories like Leo's are all around us, waiting to be told. They remind us that even in our darkest moments, hope can arrive in the most unexpected ways. What did you think of Leo's journey? Do you believe one person's kindness can truly change the world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you were moved by this story and want to hear more tales of hope, struggle, and the incredible power of the human spirit, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until next time, be kind and be well.